My name is Margaret Campbell. I'm 65 years old, and my daughter's wealthy in-laws once told me I wasn't fit to sit at a table with human beings. What they didn't know was that the woman whose car I had just spent 2 hours fixing on the side of the highway, the woman whose opinion they valued more than life itself, was about to walk through the door and serve them a justice colder than the marble on their floors. It's a story about how a little grease under your fingernails can sometimes hold more power than all the money in the world. I'd love to know where you're all listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. Let me know in the comments as you listen to my story. The phone rang at precisely 10:17 on a Saturday morning, a shrill, unwelcome sound that cut through the quiet companionship of my small kitchen. I was sitting at my worn oak table, a place that still held the ghost of my late Martha, her presence a warm echo in the morning light. The newspaper was spread out where she used to read it, a habit I couldn't break even 3 years after her passing. The ring made my hand jerk, sending a splash of black coffee across the obituaries. It felt like a bad omen. I didn't recognize the number, but I had a sinking feeling. My daughter, Rachel, usually texted. My friends knew Saturday mornings were sacred, a time for quiet reflection and the comforting smell of coffee and newsprint. I let it ring twice more, the sound grating against the peaceful silence before swiping the screen. Hello? Hello, Margaret. The voice was sterile, coated in a thin veneer of politeness that never quite hid the disdain. It was my son-in-law, Richard Thompson. My stomach did a slow, cold flip. "Richard," I said, my back straightening against the hard wooden chair. My voice was steady, betraying none of the immediate tension that coiled in my gut. "Is everything all right? Is Rachel okay?" He never called. In the 5 years since he'd married my Rachel, I could count the number of times he had initiated a call to me on 0 fingers. Communication with Richard was a one-way street, and it always went through Rachel, a gentle buffer between his world of icy privilege and my world of calloused hands and honest work. "Rachel is fine," he said, and a pause stretched across the line, long enough for me to hear the faint, tinny sound of classical music in the background. He was probably in his study, surrounded by leather-bound books he'd never read. "She insisted I call. It's my mother's 70th birthday tonight. We're having a small gathering." My stomach tightened into a knot. Serenity Thompson's birthday. The matriarch of the Thompson clan, a woman who looked at me as if I were something she had scraped off the bottom of her expensive Italian shoe. Richard's pointed emphasis on the word insisted told me everything I needed to know about who was and who wasn't extending this invitation. This was not a request. It was a reluctant obligation. "I see," I managed, my voice carefully neutral. He continued, "The family will be gathering at the house. 7 o'clock. We're having it catered. It's an important evening for my father's business as well. Business casual, of course. My parents have certain standards." Standards. The word hung in the air between us. A familiar jab. It was their favorite word, a shield they used to keep the world at bay, and a weapon they used to put people like me in their place. Their standards meant $1,000 suits and conversations about stock portfolios and summering in the Hamptons. Their standards meant a world where a woman like me, a retired mechanic who spent 40 years with grease under her nails and pride in her heart, was a permanent, embarrassing outsider. I glanced around my kitchen at the mismatched plates in the drying rack that Martha and I had collected over the years, at the hum of my old refrigerator covered in photos of Rachel growing up. My world was built on function and love, not appearances. Theirs was a fortress of polished surfaces and cold expectations. I thought of Rachel's wedding. I had worn my best suit, And Martha, bless her soul, had helped me pick it out just months before her final funeral. At the reception, I'd been talking to one of Rachel's friends about setting up her son's college fund when Palmer, Richard's father, approached. He didn't even acknowledge me, simply clapped the other man on the back and steered him away, talking loudly about a recent stock market win. Later, when I tried to congratulate Serenity, she'd looked at my hands, scrubbed clean but still showing the faint lines of a lifetime of labor, and said, "Oh, Margaret, you must try this wonderful new hand soap I've found. It simply works wonders on stubborn grime." She even sent me a bottle for Christmas. "I'll be there," I told Richard, my voice firmer than I felt. My love for Rachel was the bridge I would always cross, no matter how treacherous the other side was. She was my only child, my whole world. "Fine. 7 sharp." And the line went dead. No goodbye, no drive safe, just the click of a man eager to finish an unpleasant task. I sat there for a long moment, the dialed tone buzzing in my ear. This wasn't just a party, it was a summons. It was a test I was perpetually doomed to fail in their eyes. But Rachel had asked for me. Through Richard, yes, but it was her wish. That was enough. That had to be enough. I looked at the coffee stains spreading across the newspaper, a dark, ugly blot on the page. It felt like a premonition. Tonight, I was going to make a mess in their perfect world, one way or another. I just didn't know yet that the mess wouldn't be mine. My first stop wasn't home, but the mall. If I was walking into the lion's den, I wouldn't do it empty-handed. I needed a gift. Something that couldn't be easily dismissed, something that screamed, I made an effort, even if they refused to see it. It was a fool's errand, I knew. No gift from me would ever be good enough. But for Rachel's sake, I had to try. The mall was a blur of weekend energy, families laughing, teenagers texting. I felt a pang of loneliness, a sharp reminder of my quiet life. I bypassed the glitzy department stores, their windows filled with handbags that cost more than my monthly mortgage payment used to be. The world of the Thompsons was on full display here, a world of casual, thoughtless expense. I knew my territory. I found a small, independent boutique tucked away in a quieter corridor, a place that sold artisanal goods and smelled faintly of lavender and cedar. My eyes landed on a rack of hand-painted silk scarves. One in particular caught my eye. A beautiful cascade of deep blues and soft grays, the colors of a twilight sky. It was elegant, tasteful, and undeniably expensive. The price tag read $150. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the soft fabric. That was a significant chunk of my pension for the week. It was more than I'd ever spent on a gift for a woman who clearly despised me. My practical side, the side that knew how to budget and save, screamed at me to walk away. I could buy a perfectly nice machine-made scarf for a third of the price.
But then I thought of Rachel's face, the pleading in her eyes the last time the Thompsons had made a cutting remark about my profession. She was always caught in the middle, trying to smooth over the chasm between her two worlds. She deserved a mother who at least looked like she was trying to bridge that gap. This scarf wasn't really for Serenity. It was for Rachel. It was a shield, a peace offering I was extending for my daughter's sake. It was a silent plea. Please, just for tonight, be kind to my mother. I took a deep breath and carried it to the counter. "I'll take it," I said to the friendly cashier, a young woman with kind eyes and a warm smile. The words felt heavier than they should. "It's beautiful," she said, wrapping it carefully in layers of tissue paper. "A special gift for a special someone?" "For my son-in-law's mother," I replied, a bit of the truth slipping out. "It's complicated." The cashier gave me a knowing look, a flicker of shared female understanding. "Aren't they all?" she said with a soft chuckle. And in that small moment, I felt more connection than I ever had with the entire Thompson family. With the beautifully wrapped gift box sitting on the passenger seat of my old Ford F-150, I headed home to get ready. The afternoon was already slipping away. On the highway, the traffic was thick. A sea of shiny new SUVs and sedans flowed around my reliable, scratched-up truck. I felt a familiar sense of being out of place, a sturdy workhorse in a parade of show ponies. The sky, which had been a brilliant blue, was starting to cloud over. A light drizzle began to fall, slicking the asphalt and blurring the red taillights ahead of me. I glanced at the dashboard clock. 5:15 p.m. The Thompsons' house was still a good 45 minutes away in perfect conditions. With this weather and traffic, I was going to be late. Not horribly late, but late enough for them to notice, to exchange those knowing glances that said, "Of course she's late. People like her have no sense of time." My knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. It was then that I saw it. Up ahead, on the right shoulder, a silver Mercedes-Benz was stopped, its hazard lights blinking in the gloomy afternoon. A plume of white smoke, or maybe steam, curled from under the hood, mingling with the rain. Standing beside it was a woman, her silver hair impeccably styled, holding a small umbrella that seemed utterly inadequate against the wind and spray from passing trucks. My foot instinctively eased off the accelerator. My mechanic's brain kicked in, diagnosing the problem before I'd even made a conscious decision. Blown radiator hose, maybe? Or a failed water pump? Belt's probably gone. The driver was alone, vulnerable, and in the exact kind of trouble I knew how to fix. I glanced at the gift box on the seat beside me. I thought of Serenity's cold eyes, of Palmer's dismissive handshake, of Richard's condescending tone. Arriving late would be bad. Arriving late and covered in road grime would be a cardinal sin. It would prove every negative thing they thought about me. "Just keep driving, Maggie," a small, cowardly voice in my head whispered. "It's not your problem." But then I looked back at the stranded car, at the woman who looked to be around my age, clearly distressed. I thought of Martha. If she were here, she wouldn't have hesitated for a second. "Decency costs nothing, Maggie, but it's worth everything." I flicked on my turn signal. My heart pounded with a mixture of dread and resolve. I pulled my truck onto the shoulder about 20 feet behind the Mercedes. The decision made. The Thompsons and their standards could wait. There was a human being who needed help, and helping people was my standard. The moment I stepped out of my truck, the roar of the highway hit me like a physical force. Rain plastered my hair to my forehead as I pulled on the heavy-duty work jacket I always kept behind the seat. I walked toward the stranded car, my boots crunching on the wet gravel of the shoulder. She watched my approach, her expression a mixture of caution and desperation. She was dressed in a tailored navy blue blazer and expensive-looking trousers. Even in her distress, she carried an air of authority. "Car trouble?" I called out over the noise, keeping a respectful distance so as not to startle her. "It just died," she said, her voice crisp and educated, though tinged with anxiety. There was a terrible grinding noise, and then all the lights on the dashboard lit up like a Christmas tree. "I'm Margaret," I said, offering a hand that was clean, for now. "I used to be a mechanic. Mind if I take a look? It's no trouble." She hesitated for only a second, her sharp eyes assessing me, before taking my hand. Her grip was firm, confident. "Elizabeth Whitfield, please, I'd be grateful for any help. My roadside assistance is quoting over an hour, and I have a very important engagement this evening." "Don't we all?" I muttered under my breath, then gave her a reassuring smile. "Let's see what we've got." I popped the hood, and the scent of hot metal and burnt coolant filled the air. It was exactly as I suspected, a classic case. The serpentine belt was shredded, its black ribbons tangled around the pulleys, and the water pump pulley was wobbling precariously. "Well, here's the good news and the bad news," I announced, straightening up and wiping my hands on a rag I pulled from my pocket. "The bad news is your water pump has failed completely. The good news is I think I can rig it to get you off this highway." Elizabeth looked impressed, her caution melting away into cautious optimism. "You can fix this? Here? On the side of the road?" "I won't be a permanent fix," I warned, already walking back to my truck to get my tools. "But it'll get you to a proper garage.
I keep a pretty serious toolkit in my truck. It'll take me a while, though. Time is something I seem to have an abundance of right now, she said with a wry smile. What can I do to help? Just stay safe on this side of the guardrail, I said, and maybe hold this flashlight steady. For the next hour, as traffic whizzed by, sending waves of dirty water splashing against the guardrail, I worked. Elizabeth held the heavy-duty flashlight, a silent, steady presence. We fell into an easy conversation, the kind you have with a stranger when the usual social barriers are down. I learned she was a widow, too, and had taken over her late husband's investment firm, Whitfield Capital, after he passed away. It's a tough world to be a woman in, isn't it? She remarked, watching my hands deftly work a wrench in the tight, complicated space of the German engine. Tell me about it, I grunted, finally loosening a stubborn bolt. They see an old woman and think I can't change a tire, let alone rebuild an alternator. They forget that experience counts for something.
She laughed, a genuine, warm sound that was a welcome contrast to the howl of the traffic. My late husband, David, always said that character is the most important asset. He was a brilliant man, a titan in his field, but he respected a skilled craftsman more than any CEO. He used to say, you can judge a person's soul by how they treat someone they believe can do nothing for them. I've made that a cornerstone of my business philosophy. The words struck me, resonating with a truth I had lived my entire life. It was the yardstick Martha and I had always measured people by. Your husband sounds like he was a good man, I said, pausing to look up at her. Her face was illuminated by the flashlight she was holding, and I saw a deep kindness in her eyes. He was the best, she said, her voice softening with memory. He would have liked you, Margaret. He admired competence and integrity above all else. She sighed. I'm on my way to a business dinner now, actually, a final evaluation of a family-run company that wants a significant investment. I'm meeting them at a birthday party, of all things. A bit unorthodox, but I believe seeing people in a social setting, seeing how they treat their family and their staff, tells you more than any boardroom presentation. The bolt finally came free with a satisfying clink. I felt a little thrill of victory. Well, I hope they live up to your husband's standards, I said. It sounds like a high bar to clear. It is, she said grimly, and from what I've heard, I have my doubts. But one must do their due diligence. We worked in comfortable silence for a while after that. The only sounds, the clink of my tools and the roar of the highway. I was focused, in my element. This was a language I understood. Metal, wires, belts and bolts. They didn't judge you. They either worked or they didn't. There was an honesty to it that I rarely found in people. As I worked on fitting a bypass hose, a temporary fix that would get her cooling system functioning again, my hands were already black with grease and grime. The rain had soaked through my jacket and a chill was starting to set in. Elizabeth, ever thoughtful, had retrieved a blanket from her trunk and draped it over my shoulders. I can't believe you do this, she said, shaking her head in admiration. You're like a surgeon. Just a different kind of patient, I replied, tightening the last clamp. An engine is a lot like a heart. You have to know how all the parts work together. One little thing goes wrong and the whole system can shut down. She checked the time on her elegant gold watch. Oh dear, it's nearly 6:30. I'm going to be terribly late for this party. And you must be even later for your family gathering. It's all right, I said, though a knot of anxiety was tightening in my stomach. Family will understand. Or they won't. Either way, this was more important. I insist on paying you for your time and parts, Margaret. This is far beyond a simple favor, she said, reaching for the purse that sat on her passenger seat. Absolutely not, I said, holding up a greasy hand to stop her. I wouldn't hear of it. A helping hand shouldn't come with an invoice. Just pay it forward someday. Help someone else who's stuck. She looked at me, her expression serious. A woman of principle. I admire that. It's a rare quality in my line of work. Most people are always looking for their angle, their promotion, what they can get out of a situation. She paused, then asked, You said you're retired? What was the name of the garage you worked for? If they have mechanics half as good as you, I'd like to send my business there. My whole company fleet. It was just a small independent shop,
I said with a smile, a wave of nostalgia washing over me. Campbell and Son. My son being a figure of speech, of course. It was just me and Martha. We poured our life savings into it. It wasn't a big salary, but it was ours. Well, Margaret of Campbell and Son, you have my eternal gratitude. As I was packing up my tools, wiping each one clean before putting it back in its place, she sighed, I suppose I should get going. I just hope this whole Thompson family business is worth the trouble. I froze. My hand, holding a heavy socket wrench, stopped in midair. The name echoed in the roar of the highway, a sudden jarring note in the symphony of our easy conversation. Thompson? It couldn't be. The world wasn't that small, was it? I turned slowly, my face carefully neutral, schooling my features to show nothing but mild curiosity. Thompson? I repeated, as if I hadn't heard correctly over the sound of a passing semi. Yes, Thompson Construction, she confirmed, oblivious to the bombshell she had just dropped. Run by a Palmer Thompson. Do you know them? It's his wife Serenity's birthday party tonight at their home in Westbrook Hills. A cold, clear understanding washed over me. It was so sudden, so total, that it felt like a physical shock. The world spun for a second. This elegant, kind woman, this kindred spirit I just spent the better part of 2 hours with, was the important investor. She was the reason for the standards, the cause of the frantic phone call from Richard. She was the person the Thompsons were desperate to impress. And I, the grease-stained mechanic, the embarrassing in-law they tried to hide, was the one who had just rescued her from the side of a highway. A strange feeling settled in my chest. It wasn't triumph, not yet. It was a kind of quiet, humming power. The universe, in its strange and mysterious way, had just dealt me a hand of cards I never knew I had. My mind raced. I could tell her. I could say, "That's my son-in-law's family. What a coincidence." We could laugh about it, and she would walk into that party knowing our connection. But a different instinct took over. A sharper, more strategic one. An instinct honed by years of being underestimated. I thought of Elizabeth's husband's words. Judge a person by how they treat someone they believe can do nothing for them. Tonight, the Thompsons believed I could do nothing for them. Elizabeth was about to see them in their natural habitat, unfiltered. My presence there, as a stranger to her, would be the ultimate test of their character. No, I said, my voice steady, the lie feeling more like a strategic move than a deception. I don't know them personally. Westbrook Hills is a bit out of my league. Well, from what I hear, it's all surface and no substance, she said with a conspiratorial wink. But I wish you the best of luck with your family gathering, Margaret. You too, Elizabeth, I said, my voice even. I hope your evaluation of the Thompsons goes well.
I watched the silver Mercedes pull back onto the highway and disappear into the stream of traffic. I stood there for a long moment on the wet shoulder, the rain starting to fall harder. Then I looked down at my hands, covered in the dirt and oil from her engine. For the first time all day, I smiled. I wasn't walking into a lion's den anymore. I was walking in as the lion tamer. By the time I pulled up to the Thompson mansion, it was 7:45 p.m. The house was a monument to excess, ablaze with lights that spilled out onto a perfectly manicured lawn that looked like it was trimmed with scissors. A parade of luxury cars, BMWs, Audis, another Mercedes, lined the circular driveway, each one gleaming under the porch lights despite the rain. My old Ford F-150, with its faded paint and a dent in the fender from a rogue shopping cart, looked like a stray dog that had wandered into a pedigree dog show. I took a moment in the cab of my truck, the engine ticking as it cooled. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My hair was a damp, tangled mess. My face was smudged with dirt that I'd failed to scrub off completely with a wet wipe, and my simple navy blouse now had a prominent dark grease stain on the front that looked like a Rorschach test. The gift-wrapped scarf sat pristine on the seat beside me, a stark contrast to my disheveled state. I was the living embodiment of everything the Thompsons disdained. Taking a deep breath, I grabbed the gift and walked up the stone pathway, the rain soaking my shoulders. The front door was a massive, imposing slab of mahogany with a brass knocker the size of my fist. Before I could bring myself to use it, the door swung open. Serenity Thompson stood there, a vision in a silk dress the color of champagne. Her silver hair was swept into an elegant chignon, and diamonds glittered at her ears and throat. Her eyes, expertly made up, widened slightly as she saw me, then narrowed into slits of pure, unadulterated horror. She took in my appearance, from my wet hair down to my practical, non-designer boots, and her lip curled in a way that was almost imperceptible, but to me, it was as loud as a shout. "Margaret," she said, her voice a low, dangerous purr. It wasn't a greeting. It was an accusation. It was the sound of a queen discovering a peasant in her throne room. "Serenity, happy birthday," I said, my voice even. I held out the gift. "I'm so sorry I'm late. I had some car trouble on the way." She took the box from me with 2 fingers, holding it away from her body as if it were contaminated. "I see," she said, her eyes flicking over my stained blouse again. Behind her, I could see Palmer and Richard approaching from the grand living room, their faces masks of strained politeness that quickly crumbled into matching expressions of dismay. "There you are," Richard said, his voice tight with annoyance. He wasn't even trying to hide it. "We were worried." "No, you weren't," I said, my voice quiet but firm, cutting through his pretense. "You were annoyed. There's a difference." Richard flinched as if I'd slapped him. Rachel appeared then, rushing from the living room, her face pale with worry. She was beautiful in a dark green dress that probably cost a fortune, but her eyes were shadowed with the familiar stress of a Thompson family event. "Mom! Oh, thank God! I was so worried when you didn't answer your phone. Are you okay?" She threw her arms around me, not caring about the grease or the rain on my jacket. Her hug was the only warmth I had felt since stepping on the property. A brief, desperate embrace. "I'm fine, sweetheart," I whispered into her hair. "Just got held up helping someone on the highway." "Helping someone?" Serenity repeated, the words dripping with sarcasm. She peeled Rachel away from me as if separating a child from a dangerous influence. "How typical. Always involved in some roadside drama. Well, you can't possibly come in looking like that. The powder room is down the hall. Perhaps you can repair the damage." Palmer stepped forward, placing a proprietary hand on Rachel, a gesture of ownership. "Your mother seems to attract trouble, Rachel. We have important guests tonight. This is not the time for such things." The 4 of them stood there, a wall of wealth and scorn, and they were trying to make me feel like I was nothing more than a piece of dirt they had to tolerate. But they didn't know what I knew. They didn't know that their most important guest, the woman who held their future in her hands, had called me a lifesaver just an hour ago. So I held my head high, met their gazes without flinching, and said, "I'll just say a quick hello to the guests. I don't want to intrude on your important evening." My polite words were a quiet challenge, and from the flicker of anger in Serenity's eyes, I knew she'd heard it loud and clear. The living room was exactly what you'd expect, vast, impersonal, and filled with people who all looked like they'd been cut from the same bolt of expensive cloth. Conversations were hushed, laughter was restrained, and crystal glasses clinked with expensive wine. It was a room full of people performing the part of having a good time. When I entered, trailing behind Rachel, a wave of silence followed us, as if I had dragged a muddy dog into a sterile operating room. Every head turned. I saw the quick, curious glances, the raised eyebrows, the whispers behind manicured hands. I was a stain on their pristine canvas. I tried to find a quiet corner to fade into, a place where I could observe without being observed. But Serenity, it seemed, had other plans.
It wasn't enough to be dismissive at the door. She needed to make a public example of me. The dining room was adjacent, the long mahogany table already set for dinner with gleaming silverware and cowering floral centerpieces that must have cost a fortune. Guests were beginning to move toward it, finding their place carts. When I took a step in that direction, hoping to find an empty chair at the far end of the table where I could be invisible, Serenity's voice cut through the air like a whip. "Oh, I don't think so." The entire party froze. All motion ceased. The low hum of conversation died instantly. Every eye in the room swiveled to fixate on the two of us. I stood there, trapped in the spotlight of her malice, the heat of dozens of stares prickling my skin. She walked toward me, her champagne-colored dress rustling with each deliberate step. She stopped a few feet away, her face a mask of cold fury. She was playing to the audience, and she was enjoying every second of it. "I believe I made myself clear about the standards for this evening," she said, her voice rising so everyone, even the caterers in the kitchen, could hear. Then she delivered the blow she had been saving up all night, the words designed to shatter what little dignity I had left. "If you cannot be bothered to dress like a human being," she announced to the silent room, her voice ringing with triumph.
The silence that followed was absolute, profound. It was so quiet I could hear the frantic beat of my own heart. I saw Rachel's face crumple, tears welling in her eyes. "Mother Serenity, please," she whispered, her voice cracking with shame and desperation. "That's my mother." "Exactly," Richard chimed in, stepping to his mother's side, a loyal soldier in her war on decency. "And she should have shown you and us and all our guests more respect." This was it. This was the moment they had always wanted, to put me in my place, to humiliate me so completely that I would never dare cross the threshold of their world again. I could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on me, some filled with pity, others with a kind of morbid curiosity. They were watching a public execution of character. It was then that Rachel did something that surprised me, something that made my heart swell with a fierce, protective love. She stepped away from her husband and came to my side. She took my greasy hand in hers, her own trembling. "That is enough," she said, her voice shaking but clear. She wasn't speaking to me. She was speaking to them. "This is my mother. She is the kindest, most decent person I know, and I will not stand here and listen to you talk to her this way." Palmer's face darkened with rage. He took a step forward, his bulk seeming to fill the room. "Rachel, you will be silent," he hissed, his voice a low, vicious growl. "Do you have any idea what is at stake tonight? Do you have any idea who is about to walk through that door? Do you want to be responsible for ruining the future of this entire family? Think about your custody of this lifestyle you enjoy so much. Think about the divorce that might follow if you continue this foolishness." The threat, ugly and blatant, hung in the air like poison gas. Custody of a lifestyle. He was treating her like a child, reminding her that her comfort, her very marriage, was conditional on her obedience. Rachel paled, her newfound courage faltering under the weight of his brutal words. She looked from her husband, who refused to meet her eyes, to her father-in-law, her face a canvas of heartbreak and betrayal. She had tried, for me, she had tried, and they had crushed her for it. And that's all Ani needed. The last bit of restraint I held for Rachel's sake evaporated. They had not only insulted me, they had threatened my daughter. The game had changed. I gave Rachel's hand a gentle squeeze, a silent message that said, "It's okay, I've got this now." I let go of her hand and took a half step forward, placing myself directly in front of Serenity. I didn't say a word. I just looked at her. I held her gaze, my expression unreadable. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I didn't defend myself. I simply stood there in my stained clothes, a silent, unmovable object in the face of her fury. My silence was my weapon. It was a mirror, and I was forcing her to look at her own ugliness.
The silence stretched. It became uncomfortable, then awkward, then almost unbearable. The guests shifted on their feet. A woman in pearls nervously fingered her necklace. A man in a tuxedo cleared his throat. Palmer's face was turning a blotchy red. Richard looked at his expensive Italian shoes as if they held the secrets of the universe. They had expected me to crumble, to run away in tears. They didn't know what to do with my quiet defiance. My refusal to play the victim had stolen their power. I was no longer the subject of the humiliation. I was the conductor of this terrible silent orchestra. In my mind, I was calm. I was counting. I was waiting. I knew Elizabeth had to be close. Every second that ticked by was another drop of acid on the Thompsons' composure. I could see the panic starting to flicker in Serenity's eyes. My silence was unnerving her. It was an act of rebellion she couldn't comprehend. She needed a reaction, a fight or a flight, and I was giving her neither. I was a rock, and her waves of hatred were breaking against me, uselessly. A guest near the back coughed nervously, a dry, rasping sound that was like a gunshot in the stillness. "Well," Serenity finally snapped, her voice brittle, the carefully constructed facade of the elegant hostess cracking under the strain. "Are you going to leave, or do you intend to stand there and ruin my birthday party with your presence?" I still didn't speak. I let her insult hang in the air, letting every single person in that room absorb the full weight of its cruelty. I was giving them time. Time to see her for who she truly was. Time for the arrival I knew was coming. My gaze flickered past her, toward the grand front door. "Any second now, Elizabeth." And then, as if summoned by my thoughts, the deep, melodic chime of the doorbell echoed through the house. A collective sigh of relief seemed to pass through the room. Everyone turned toward the sound, grateful for the interruption. Richard, looking more relieved than anyone to have an escape, scurried toward the foyer. "That must be our final guest," he announced with a forced cheerfulness that sounded pathetic to everyone's ears. "Our most important guest." I allowed myself a small internal smile. The curtain was about to rise on the final act. I hadn't been ruined. I had been waiting, and the star of the show had just arrived. Richard swung the heavy door open, and a wave of cool night air swept into the stuffy, tense atmosphere. Framed in the doorway, silhouetted against the dark, stood Elizabeth Whitfield. She was the picture of elegance, her silver hair catching the light from the crystal chandelier in the foyer. She had changed into a simple but exquisitely cut black dress, a single strand of pearls at her throat. The moment her eyes adjusted, she scanned the room. Her gaze passed over the stunned faces of the guests, over Palmer and Serenity, and then it found me, standing alone in the center of the room. Her entire face lit up with a smile of pure, unadulterated delight. "Margaret!" she exclaimed, her warm voice carrying across the silent room, a beautiful melody after a chorus of shrieking insults. "What a wonderful surprise! I had a feeling I might see you here." Ignoring the dumbfounded Thompsons completely, she strode across the marble floor directly to me. She took both of my hands in hers, her own trembling. "I am so glad to see you. I was worried about you driving home in this rain. You look like you've had quite an evening already." The room was a sea of confused faces. The Thompsons looked like they had seen a ghost. Palmer's jaw was slack, and Serenity's perfectly painted smile was frozen in a grotesque parody of welcome. They were trying to process the impossible. The embarrassing blue-collar mother-in-law was being greeted like a cherished friend by the multi-millionaire investor who held their fate in her hands. Palmer finally managed to stammer forward, his face slick with a sudden sweat. "Mrs. Whitfield, welcome to our home. We are so honored. I see you've met Margaret Campbell. She's Rachel's mother." He was trying to frame me as a simple relative, a footnote, desperately trying to control the narrative.
Met her? Elizabeth laughed, a rich, musical sound. She turned to face him but still held one of my hands, a clear signal of alliance.
Palmer, this woman is nothing short of a guardian angel. My car broke down on the highway in the middle of this storm. I was completely stranded. And this incredible woman pulled over, spent nearly 2 hours of her own time in the pouring rain, and got my engine running again. She rebuilt a part of my engine with tools from her truck. She refused to take a single penny. She beamed at me, then turned her radiant smile on the assembled guests. She's a true hero. A ripple of murmurs went through the crowd. The guests were looking at me differently now, not with pity, but with a dawning respect and a healthy dose of curiosity. The story was changing, and they were all leaning in to hear the next chapter. Elizabeth's smile faded slightly as she took in the scene again. My disheveled appearance, Rachel's tear-streaked face, the rigid, hostile postures of Serenity and Palmer. Her sharp eyes missed nothing. "Is everything all right, though?" she asked, her voice losing some of its warmth. "I feel as if I've walked into the middle of something rather tense." This was Serenity's chance to recover, to apologize, to smooth things over. She chose instead to double down on her arrogance, to try and lie her way out of the hole she had dug. "Oh, it's nothing, Mrs. Whitfield," she said with a brittle laugh, trying to sound dismissive and charming. "Just a small family matter. A little misunderstanding about the dress code. We were just having a little joke with her." She shot me a look that was both a plea and a threat. Play along or else. Elizabeth's eyebrows rose. "The dress code?" she repeated, her voice dangerously soft. She looked down at my stained blouse and greasy hands, then back up at my face. "You mean Margaret's clothes? The clothes she's wearing because she was busy saving a stranger, me, on the side of a highway so I could be here tonight?" The temperature in the room plummeted. The lie was so transparent, so insulting to everyone's intelligence, that it was breathtaking. "We were just trying to lighten the mood," Richard chimed in, his voice trembling. "My mother has a very dry sense of humor." Elizabeth's gaze was now ice. She turned from the lying faces of the Thompsons and looked directly at me. Her eyes weren't just asking a question, they were offering me a platform. They were offering me the sword. "Margaret," she said, her voice clear and calm, a judge asking for the final testimony. "Is that what happened? Were they joking?" This was it. The moment of truth. All the years of bitten tongues, of swallowing insults for Rachel's sake, of feeling small in their opulent world, it all came down to this. I could have been gracious. I could have let it go, accepted their pathetic lie to save them face in front of the woman they so desperately needed. The old Margaret, the one who always chose peace for her daughter's sake, might have done just that. But then I thought of Rachel's face when Palmer had threatened her with divorce and the loss of her comfortable life. I thought of the word standards being used like a weapon against me for years. I thought of Martha, who never backed down from a bully in her life. And I thought of Elizabeth's husband's words, "Character is what you do when you think no one important is watching." I met Elizabeth's steady gaze. My voice, when it came, was not loud, but it was as clear and solid as steel, and it carried to every corner of that silent waiting room. "No, Elizabeth," I said, clearly and slowly. "They were not joking." I turned my head and looked directly at Serenity, whose face had gone a chalky white. "Just before you arrived, Mrs. Thompson informed me, in front of all of her guests, that if I could not dress like a human being, I was not permitted to sit at the table with human beings." A collective gasp went through the room. It was a soft, sibilant sound, like the air being let out of a balloon. Several guests looked away, their faces flushed with secondhand shame. Richard dropped his wine glass. It shattered on the marble floor, the red wine spreading like a pool of blood, a perfect metaphor for the evening. Elizabeth's expression didn't change, but a formidable coldness emanated from her. She dropped my hand and took a step toward Palmer, who looked like he was about to have a heart attack. He was visibly trembling. "So, let me see if I understand this, Palmer."
she said, her voice the quiet, deadly tone of a CEO about to dismantle a failing division. My firm is considering a $5 million investment in your company, an investment I now understand is critical to keeping Thompson Construction from going under. This investment, this promotion of your company into the big leagues, depends heavily on my assessment of your character, a fact I made explicitly clear in our preliminary meetings. I come to your home to make that final assessment, and I find you and your family humiliating the very woman whose kindness, skill, and integrity made it possible for me to even get here tonight. A woman who embodies every quality I look for in a business partner. Mrs. Whitfield, please, Palmer begged, his voice a hoarse whisper. His face was slick with sweat. We had no idea. It was a misunderstanding. We had no idea. If we had known she was your friend. That's the point. Elizabeth's voice rose, sharp and cutting, silencing his pathetic excuses. You had no idea, and it shouldn't matter. You thought she was nobody. You thought she was a person you could abuse without consequence. You thought her worth was determined by the clothes she wore and the dirt on her hands, not the goodness in her heart. You didn't know I was watching, but a person's true character isn't for show, it's for every day. It's for the moments when you think no one important is watching. She looked around the room, her gaze sweeping over the horrified guests. My late husband taught me that character is what you do when you think no one important is watching. Tonight you have all shown me your character. And I have to say, I've never seen a more bankrupt account in my life. She turned back to Palmer and Serenity. My decision is made. I would sooner invest my money in a bonfire than entrust it to people who lack basic human decency and foresight. The deal is off. Thompson Construction will not be receiving a single dollar from me. I suggest you contact a bankruptcy lawyer first thing Monday morning. The finality of her words was absolute. It was a death sentence, delivered with surgical precision. Serenity let out a small, strangled cry and staggered back, putting a hand to her chest. Palmer seemed to shrink, all the bluster and arrogance draining out of him, leaving behind a frail, defeated old man. Richard just stared at the spreading puddle of red wine on the floor, as if it were the lifeblood of his family's fortune, now spilled and wasted. The great and powerful Thompsons had been brought down, not by a corporate takeover or a stock market crash, but by a moment of casual cruelty, witnessed by the one person they couldn't afford to offend. Their obsession with appearances had led them to misjudge the one appearance that truly mattered, the appearance of a good and decent soul.
Elizabeth turned her back on the wreckage of the Thompson family, the tableau of their silent, stunned ruin, and walked back to me. She gently took my arm. Her touch was firm, grounding. "Come on, Margaret," she said softly, her voice warm again, a stark contrast to the icy tone she had used to deliver their sentence. "I believe I owe you a steak dinner. Let's leave these people to their standards." As we walked toward the door, a path clearing before us as guests averted their eyes or stared in stunned silence, Rachel rushed to me. Her face was a mess of tears, but through them a new strength shone, a resolve I hadn't seen in years. "Mom," she sobbed, hugging me tightly, her body shaking. "I'm so sorry. I should have been stronger. I should have—" "Shh," I whispered back, holding her tight. "You were brave, sweetheart. You stood up for me. That's all that matters." I pulled back and held her face in my hands, my greasy thumbs smudging her perfect makeup. "This isn't your fault. You were caught in their web, but you don't have to stay there." "What am I going to do?" she asked, her voice filled with a terrifying uncertainty about her future, her marriage, a potential divorce that her father-in-law had so cruelly thrown in her face. I looked into her eyes, my daughter's eyes, and I gave her the only advice I could. "You're going to remember who you are," I told her, my voice fierce with love. "You are my daughter. You have a good heart and a strong spine. You just forgot how to use it. Don't let them poison you. Don't let their fear become your fear."
I gave her a final squeeze and turned to leave. My heart ached for her, for the difficult path ahead, but I also felt a surge of pride. She had her mother's spine, after all. She just needed to learn to stand up straight. Elizabeth and I walked out of that cold, silent house and into the clean, rain-washed night air. It felt like walking out of a prison. The air smelled of wet earth and freedom. "My car or yours?" she asked, a twinkle in her eye. "Mine's more reliable," I said with a grin, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, we both laughed. It was a real, deep, cleansing laugh. We ended up at Miller's Steakhouse, a local institution with red vinyl booths, warm lighting, and the comfortable buzz of happy, ordinary people. No pretense, no judgment. The waitress, a cheerful woman named Flo, called us Hun and didn't bat an eye at my stained blouse. We sat in a corner booth, and over perfectly cooked steaks and glasses of iced tea, we talked. We didn't talk about the Thompsons. We didn't need to. The subject was closed. Instead, we talked about Martha and David, our late spouses. We shared stories, laughing at their quirks and tearing up at the memories. We talked about our lives, our work, the deep satisfaction of fixing something with your own two hands, whether it was a broken engine or a failing company. I learned that Elizabeth had grown up in a small town in Pennsylvania, the daughter of a coal miner. She'd worked her way through college and met her husband there. She understood the value of hard work and the sting of being underestimated. She had faced down boardrooms full of men who thought she was just a grieving widow, not a savvy investor. "You know," she said, dabbing her lips with a paper napkin, "I've overseen deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I've sat across from titans of industry who thought they could pull the wool over my eyes. But the most impressive display of character I've seen in years was on the shoulder of a highway this afternoon." "I just did what anyone should do," I said, feeling my cheeks grow warm. "No, Margaret," she said, her gaze serious and kind. "You did what very few people actually do, and you did it without expecting anything in return. That's not just decency, that's wealth. The real kind. The kind you can't inherit or buy. The kind you build, one right decision at a time." A friendship was forged that night in the comfortable quiet of an old steakhouse. It wasn't built on shared status or financial gain. It was built on a shared understanding of what truly matters: integrity, kindness, and the quiet dignity of a job well done. We were two widows from different worlds who had found common ground in the most unexpected way. We were two women who knew our own worth, and we had just found it in each other. Driving home on the empty streets long after midnight, my old truck felt like a chariot. The windows were down, and the cool, clean air smelled of rain and freedom. My hands rested on the steering wheel, the phantom feeling of grease and metal still there, but now it felt like a badge of honor. It was the mark of my competence, the proof of my usefulness. I pulled into my driveway and cut the engine. The little house was dark and quiet, but it didn't feel empty tonight. It felt like a sanctuary. I sat there for a moment, replaying the evening in my head. I didn't feel a sense of vengeful glee at the Thompsons' downfall. That wasn't my way. What I felt was a profound, bone-deep sense of rightness, of balance restored to the universe. It was the feeling of a well-tuned engine, everything working exactly as it should. Their empire, built on a foundation of arrogance and scorn, had been brought low not by a powerful rival, but by their own character flaws. They had judged me by the dirt on my hands, never imagining that those same hands held the key to their salvation. They had tried to rob me of my dignity, never realizing that true dignity isn't something someone can give you or take away. It's what you carry inside you, in the quiet knowledge of your own worth. I thought about the word Elizabeth had used, wealth. For years, I had let the Thompsons define that word. Wealth was their mansion, their cars, their 5-figure salary checks, and talk of a fat inheritance that would pass to Richard. It was a country club membership and a son with a guaranteed promotion. It was a world I could never access, and they made sure I knew it every single day. But tonight, I understood. My wealth wasn't in a bank account. It was in my skills, my ability to turn chaos into order with a set of tools. It was in the memory of a 40-year love with Martha, a love built on laughter and mutual respect, not on balance sheets. It was in a daughter who, when pushed to the absolute limit, found the courage to stand for what was right. And now, it was in a new friendship with a woman who saw me, truly saw me, for exactly who I am. My phone buzzed on the seat beside me. It was a text from an unknown number. "This is Elizabeth. I hope you don't mind. I got your number from Rachel. Thank you, Margaret, for everything. You reminded me what real strength looks like." I smiled and typed back, my fingers feeling nimble and sure. "Thank you, Elizabeth. You reminded me I wasn't alone in believing in it. Drive safe."
I finally went inside, my heart feeling lighter than it had in years. I walked into my quiet kitchen and filled my chipped blue mug with water. I looked around at my simple, peaceful life. I wasn't rich. I wasn't powerful in the way the world measured such things. But I was worthy. I had always been worthy. And I finally felt it, all the way to my bones. Justice, it turns out, sometimes arrives in the form of a stranded motorist and the quiet strength to wait for the truth to catch up. And sometimes the best tool you have is a little bit of grease on your hands and a whole lot of integrity in your heart.